Chapter 4. Constructing a system to explain irritability and anger. The leaky bucket. If we can put all that we have worked out so far into a diagram, it will help us predict when we are going to be irritable or angry, and more to the point, prevent it happening. So let's have a look at Fig 4.1 on page 24, which summarises what we have said so far about Judy's case. Fig 4.1, kept waiting in hospital. Trigger. Example, kept waiting with young child in a hospital outpatient department. This led to anger, which led to inhibitions. I'd better keep quiet or my youngster won't get the best treatment. Anyway, you just don't get angry with doctors, which led to the response, polite behaviour concentrating on the child's illness. This is actually a particularly interesting example because many people ask what happens to the anger. In other words, a lot of people assume that unless you get rid of your anger, then it somehow just builds up inside you. This is in fact the reverse of the truth. What actually happens is that the anger just gradually dissipates. The best analogy is a leaky bucket full of water. The bucket was absolutely full in this case. Judy was very angry indeed. Nevertheless, over time, all that anger just gradually seeped away, just as water seeps out of a leaky bucket, and now in the ordinary course of things she doesn't give it a thought. Nevertheless, if you remind her of the event, it is like pouring some more water into the bucket. The key concept is doing what you think is appropriate in the situation. In this case, the mother judged that her behaviour was indeed appropriate, as her child might well have not received the best treatment if she had kicked up a fuss. So even in retrospect, she still judges that she did right. By the same token, we get angry with ourselves when in retrospect we think we did not behave correctly. Again, the important concept is behaving in proportion to the situation, doing what you think is right in a particular situation. Later on, we will look at why our judgment sometimes goes haywire, so that on occasion we let ourselves down very badly. Fig 4.2 shows the same model applied to a different situation. The key difference is that here the inhibitions weren't strong enough to control the level of anger experienced by Sue. The anger, therefore, simply overcame her inhibitions and produced a response of ranting and raving. Actually, this does Sue a slight disservice. Certainly this is the way she described the incident, that she simply lost it. In other words, simply lost all control. But if that were really true, why did she not pick up the carving knife, they were in the kitchen after all, and stab her son 50 times? Clearly her inhibitions were functioning to a degree, but only at a relatively weak level. Or maybe they were functioning reasonably well, but the breakage produced such an immense level of anger that they were still almost overwhelmed. Fig 4.2, page 26. Mug breaks on floor. Trigger. 13-year-old son drops mug on floor. This leads to anger, which leads to inhibitions insufficient to control anger, which leads to the response, parent loses it, rants and raves at son. When the bucket overflows. Let's pursue this line of thought a little further by considering the case of Steve and the door left open in the pub. This fits into our model as shown in Fig 4.3 on page 27. Fig 4.3. Door left open in bar. Trigger. Customer comes into bar, leaves door slightly ajar and thereby allows cold draft onto another customer. This leads to anger, which leads to inhibitions, partially overcome, which leads to the response. Victim jumps to his feet, jabs finger at man who left the door open and verbally abuses him. On the face of it, this is an accurate representation of what happened. However, if you recollect the exact situation as recounted at the beginning of chapter 1, you will see that I have omitted the fact that this was the 5th time the door had been left slightly ajar. On each of the previous 4 occasions, some extra anger had been tipped into the bucket. So by the time person number 5 comes along and adds his ladle full to the bucket, the whole thing is brimful and ready to overflow, and he gives 5 the whole bucket full of anger. You may also recollect that Steve said when he was telling the story that the victim was quite a small man. What if he had been 6 feet 3 and built to match? Possibly that would have strengthened Steve's inhibitions. Most people feel inhibited about picking a fight with someone twice their size. This concept of anger building up to the point where it overflows is an important one. Adrian, a senior salesman, told me that how he was repeatedly away from home on business, jetting around the world to various exotic destinations for weeks on end. While he was away, his very attractive young wife Jenny took to having one affair after another. Gradually, Adrian became suspicious, and after he had confronted her several times, Jenny admitted what had been going on. Though obviously hurt, Adrian thought he could cope and put it to his wife that so long as she told him everything, he would be prepared to make a fresh start. So through the course of the evening, Jenny confessed to the 4 affairs she had had. She went slowly and tactfully, and Adrian was able gradually to come to terms with what had happened. They went to bed, resolved that they could put it all behind them and make a fresh start. But Jenny had remembered a 5th affair, and when they woke up the following morning, in the spirit of making a clean breast of everything, she confessed it. For Adrian, this was enough to make the bucket overflow, and they divorced. What makes you angry? By now you should be able to start making a tentative analysis of what makes you irritable and angry. You may well be able to identify several triggers. For most people there is more than one thing that makes them angry. You may even be able to quantify the amount of anger that each trigger typically produces, perhaps using a 10-point scale where 10 out of 10 is the angriest you could ever be. Maybe you can identify what inhibitions come into play, both your internal inhibitions, the personal morality and rules you have for your own behaviour, and the external inhibitions, consequences that may befall you if you overreact. You may also be able to reflect upon the various responses you have made in the past when these triggers have set off your anger. There is no need to do all that at this stage unless you want to. Later on we will look at how to analyse these elements carefully and what to do once you've analysed them. It can be very rewarding work, but for now it may be useful to consider the kinds of questions we will be asking.